August 7, 1944, 1:37 hours, Mortain, France. The ground is shaking. Not from artillery, from tanks, hundreds of them. Panzer Mark IVs, Panthers, Tigers, steel monsters crawling through the fog like something out of a nightmare. Their engines scream in the darkness, tracks chewing up cobblestone streets, crushing everything in their path. Inside the town of Mortain, American soldiers are dying in their sleep. Tents collapse under cannon fire. Foxholes become graves. This isn't a battle, it's an execution. And on the hill above, 700 men are about to become the only thing standing between Hitler's last gamble in France and total catastrophe. They don't know it yet, but in 6 days, Hill 314 will become the most important piece of ground in Normandy, and the men holding it will call down fire so accurate, so relentless, that the Germans will stop calling it a hill and start calling it what it really is: a fortress made of dirt, blood, and American artillery. 48 hours earlier, the 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory, had marched into Mortain like they owned the place. And why not? The Germans were retreating. Normandy was cracking open. Patton's Third Army was racing east, tearing through Brittany, swallowing towns whole. The war felt like it was ending. Lieutenant Ralph Curley, a forward observer with the 230th Field Artillery, remembers the mood: cocky, casual, guys joking about being in Paris by September. They'd climbed Hill 314, a rocky tree-covered lump of earth rising about 300 feet above Mortain, and dug in. No drama, just routine. 2 companies on the summit, observation posts, radio checks, cold rations. The hill wasn't strategic because it was tall. It was strategic because from up there you could see everything. Roads snaking south toward Avranches, fields sprawling east toward Barrington. The whole sector spread out like a map. If you had artillery observers on that hill, you didn't just control Mortain, you controlled the war around Mortain. And that's exactly why Hitler wanted it back. Because 3 days earlier, on August 4th, Adolf Hitler had done something he almost never did. He'd overruled his generals. Rommel was gone, wounded, sidelined. Von Kluge was in command of Army Group B, and he was begging Hitler to pull back, to save what was left of the Wehrmacht in France before the Americans encircled them all. But Hitler didn't pull back. He attacked. Operation Luttich. The plan: smash westward through Mortain with 4 Panzer divisions, punch all the way to the coast at Avranches, cut Patton's supply line, and split the entire Allied front in half. It was desperate. It was insane. And on paper it might have worked, if the Americans hadn't been sitting on Hill 314 with radios and a direct line to every howitzer in Normandy. At 1:37 on August 7th, the fog rolled in thick as wool. Perfect tank weather. The Panzers came in fast, 2nd Panzer Division from the north, 2 SS Panzer Division des Reich from the east, 116th Panzer probing from the south. Over 250 tanks, thousands of infantry. They hit Mortain like a tidal wave, overrunning positions, severing communications, scattering entire companies into the woods. By dawn, the 2nd Battalion on Hill 314 was surrounded. Cut off. No reinforcements, no resupply. And the radios, those precious SCR 610 backpack radios carried by Lieutenants Robert Weiss and Charles Bartz, were the only thing still connecting them to the outside world. The trap had closed, and now the Germans wanted that hill. There were about 700 men on Hill 314 when the fog lifted on the morning of August 7th. Most of them were riflemen, E and G companies of the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry. They had M1 Garans, a few Browning automatic rifles, some bazookas, and not much else. No tanks, no heavy machine guns, and only enough ammunition to last a couple of days if they were careful. What they did have were 2 men who would turn that hill into the deadliest weapon in Normandy: Lieutenant Robert Weiss and Lieutenant Charles Bartz, forward observers from the 230th Field Artillery Battalion. Weiss was 24, Bartz was 23. Both of them carried SCR 610 radios, bulky, temperamental backpack sets that weighed 30 pounds and could barely transmit 5 miles on a good day. But they worked, and as long as they worked, Weiss and Bartz could call fire missions down on any German position they could see. And from Hill 314, They could see everything. The first fire mission came at 600. A column of German half-tracks and trucks moving up the road from Barrington, probably reinforcements, maybe supply. Weiss spotted them through his binoculars, grabbed the radio handset and started calling coordinates. Calm, methodical, like he was ordering coffee. 30 seconds later, the first 105 shells screamed in. High-explosive rounds fused for airburst. The trucks disintegrated. Men scattered into the ditches, and then the second salvo hit, white phosphorus this time, turning the road into a blazing corridor of smoke and burning metal. The column stopped, turned around, died trying. Bart's got the next one, a Panzer company trying to move through the field southeast of Mortain. 6 tanks, maybe 8. They thought the fog would cover them. Bart's thought otherwise. He called in a time-on-target mission, multiple batteries firing simultaneously so that every shell landed at the exact same second. The impact was catastrophic. 2 tanks brewed up instantly. The rest scattered, only to drive straight into a second fire mission Weiss had already called in on their escape route. By noon, Hill 314 wasn't just a position. It was a gun, a living, breathing artillery platform. The Germans couldn't move without being seen, couldn't advance without being shelled, couldn't flank, couldn't reinforce, couldn't breathe. Every road, every field, every tree line was under observation, and Weiss and Bartz kept calling fire, mission after mission, until the artillery batteries below were firing so fast their barrels glowed red. The Germans tried to rush the hill, 3 times that first day. Infantry storming up the slopes, machine guns hammering the tree line, Panzerfaust streaking toward American foxholes. But every time they got close, Weiss would call fire on his own position, danger close missions, shells landing 50 yards away, shrapnel screaming through the trees. The Germans broke, pulled back, tried again. By nightfall on August 7th, Hill 314 had held. Barely. But the men up there knew the truth. They were surrounded, cut off, and running out of ammunition. The Germans would come again, and next time they'd come with everything. August 8th, the second day. The fog came back, thick, smothering, the kind of fog that turns 50 yards into 5, that makes every shadow a German, every sound a Panzer. The men on Hill 314 crouched in their foxholes and waited. Some prayed, some smoked, some just stared at the trees and wondered how long it would take to die. Ammunition was already running low. Rifle rounds were being counted. Grenades rationed. The battalion aid station, a dugout in the side of the hill, was overflowing with wounded. Men with shrapnel in their legs, bullets in their chests, burns from phosphorus shells. The battalion surgeon, Captain Ralph Schurer, worked without morphine, without plasma, without enough bandages. He used strips of torn uniforms to stop the bleeding and kept operating as long as he could see. The Germans attacked again at dawn. This time they came with tanks, Panthers and Mark IVs grinding up the slopes, infantry following close behind, using the armor as cover. The Americans had bazookas, but bazooka rockets don't do much against the front armor of a Panther unless you hit it just right. Most of the time, they just bounced off. So Weiss called fire, not on the tanks, on the infantry behind them. High-explosive airbursts timed to detonate above the ground, shredding anyone caught in the open. The German infantry scattered. The tanks kept coming. And then one of them hit a mine probably left over from an earlier defensive position and exploded in a fountain of flame and smoke. The others pulled back, for now. August 9th, the third day. The skies cleared, and that's when everything changed. Because when the fog lifted, the P-47 Thunderbolts came. 8 of them, maybe 10, screaming in low over the hills, wings loaded with bombs and rockets. The pilots had been briefed. Hill 314 is friendly. Everything around it is not. They went to work. Rockets slammed into German positions. Bombs cratered the roads. Machine guns raked the tree lines. The Germans tried to move their Panzers into cover, but the Typhoons showed up next, British rocket-armed fighters that could punch through tank armor like it was cardboard. The pilots called it tank busting. The tankers called it hell. And up on the hill, Weiss and Bartz kept calling targets. Coordinates flowed like water. The artillery batteries below fired until their ammunition stocks ran dry, then fired some more. The entire sector became a killing ground. The Germans couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, could only die. But the men on Hill 314 were dying too, slowly, quietly, running out of water, running out of food, running out of hope. Wounded men lay in the open because there was no room left in the aid station. The dead were stacked in shallow graves behind the command post, and still the Germans kept coming. August 10th, August 11th, August 12th. 6 days. 6 days of artillery fire so constant it felt like the air itself was exploding. 6 days of attacks and counterattacks, of men fighting with empty rifles and rocks and bare hands. 6 days of radios crackling with fire missions, of Weiss and Bartz calling coordinates until their voices gave out, until the Germans stopped trying to take the hill and started trying to kill everyone on it. By the 6th day, the 2nd Battalion had lost nearly half its strength, but Hill 314 still stood, and as long as it stood, the German counterattack was doomed. August 12, 1944, the 6th day. The men on Hill 314 didn't know it yet, but the battle was already over. Not for them. They were still surrounded, still fighting, still dying. But for the Germans, Operation Luttich had collapsed. The panzers that were supposed to reach Avranches had barely made it past Mortain. The divisions that were supposed to cut off Patton had been cut off themselves. And now, with the Americans closing in from the north and south, the entire German position was turning into a trap. A pocket Falaise. But none of that mattered to the men on the hill. All they knew was that the Germans were still out there, still attacking, still trying to kill them. The last major assault came at dawn. SS troops this time too. SS Panzer Division Das Reich, veterans of the Eastern Front, men who'd fought at Kursk and Kharkov and knew how to take a hill. They came in waves, using smoke and suppressing fire, advancing in short rushes, closing the distance. The Americans fired until their barrels burned, until the M1s jammed, until there was nothing left but bayonets and fists. And then Weiss called fire one last time, on his own position. Danger close didn't even begin to describe it. The shells were landing inside the American perimeter, so close that the shrapnel was hitting foxholes, so close that men were screaming at him to stop. But he didn't stop. He called mission after mission, adjusting fire by meters, walking the barrage through the German assault until the SS troops broke and ran. That was the end, the last attack. After that, the Germans didn't try again. They couldn't. Their tanks were gone, their infantry was shattered, and the entire sector was collapsing. By the afternoon of August 12th, elements of the 35th Infantry Division broke through the German lines and reached Hill 314. The siege was over. Relief columns brought water, ammunition, plasma. Medics rushed the wounded down the hill on stretchers. The dead were counted. The survivors just sat in their foxholes and stared. Out of the 700 men who'd held Hill 314, nearly 300 were casualties, dead, wounded, or missing. The others were hollow-eyed, filthy, stumbling. Some of them couldn't speak. Some of them couldn't stop shaking, but they'd held. For 6 days, against 4 panzer divisions, they'd held. The numbers tell part of the story. Hill 314, 700 men, 6 days, nearly 300 casualties. Operation Luttich, 4 panzer divisions, over 250 tanks, thousands of infantry, smashed against one hill and bled white. But numbers don't tell you what it felt like. They don't tell you about the smell, cordite and blood and burning flesh. They don't tell you about the sound, shells screaming and so close you could feel the concussion in your chest, radios crackling with fire missions, men screaming for medics who couldn't reach them. They don't tell you about the fear, the exhaustion, the moment when you realize you're surrounded and no one's coming and you're probably going to die on this hill. And they definitely don't tell you about Weiss and Bartz. 2 lieutenants, 2 radios, 2 men who turned Hill 314 into the most lethal piece of ground in Normandy. They called over 1,400 fire missions in 6 days, 1,400. That's 1 mission every 6 minutes around the clock for nearly a week. The artillery batteries supporting them fired over 50,000 rounds, 50,000. The barrels on some of those howitzers wore out and had to be replaced mid-battle. The Germans called Hill 314 the Hill of Death. They weren't wrong. But here's the thing, Hill 314 didn't just stop Operation Luttich, it broke it. Because as long as that hill was in American hands, the Germans couldn't move, couldn't reinforce, couldn't retreat without being seen and shelled. Every road, every field, every approach was under observation. And when the skies cleared and the fighter-bombers came, Hill 314 became the eye of the storm, the spotting post that guided every rocket, every bomb, every artillery shell onto German positions. By August 13th, the German counterattack had turned into a rout. Von Kluge pulled his forces back toward Falaise, trying to escape the pocket before it closed. He didn't make it. Neither did 50,000 German soldiers, trapped in the Falaise gap and annihilated by Allied artillery and air power. The Wehrmacht in France was finished. The road to Paris was open. And it all started on a hill. Hill 314 wasn't Omaha Beach. It wasn't the Bulge. It wasn't even a household name. But for 6 days in August 1944, it was the hinge on which the entire Battle of Normandy turned. 700 men, 2 radios, and enough guts to hold the line when everything said they should break. They didn't break. They held. And when it was over, they climbed down from that hill and walked into history, quiet, exhausted, and absolutely unbreakable.